All right, well, thank you, all of you, for your small group work, and thank you, Murph, for reconvening us. So thank you for that. Like Murph, I also visited all the rooms and sat in each one for at least a few minutes. And one of the things that I observed, one of the things that I observed, not that I don't know this, not that we don't all know this, is that, all these themes are just so challenging and the work is so hard. But I was still really gratified of the respectful and powerful level at which you guys were all engaging in conversation and building a community within your own spaces and opening up and putting stuff out on the table for everyone to grasp and to work with. I was just really grateful for that engagement that all of you had. And I think it's really great that we can now move into this last panel, which is about building transformative movements, which is really important. This is something, if we're going to be successful in doing the deep work that needs to be done to make our society better, to, this theme of that I keep hearing that is so true about we need to recognize we're dealing with human beings. We are humans, and the people we're talking about are humans, and we have a lot that we share in common, and we need to treat each other with a lot more care, compassion, and respect. And in the same way, for us to be in a movement together, we have to do that together, right? We have to deal with each other with honesty and care and compassion and respect. And so I'm excited that we have this great group of people to talk about transformative movements and what that might look like. And I'm also excited and happy to get to introduce our moderator for this panel, who is Nikita Oliver. And in the program, there was an awfully short, simple, and sweet bio that she provided. A former teacher, community organizer, and artist working toward a JD and a Master's of Education at UW, which is so incredibly understated for the fact that this is a woman who is incredibly brilliant, an intellect, a scholar, an activist, a poet, an artist in every possible way, a woman with heart and soul and an unbridled passion and energy to work together with others to see truly transformative change in the world. So that still doesn't really quite capture all of it, but I want you to join me in welcoming Nikita Oliver, and she'll introduce the panel.
That was quite the introduction. So we have a really exciting panel for you all, and before I introduce them, I kind of want to set a landscape for what we're going to be talking about in the next hour and 45 minutes. And we really want to take us from the point of thinking about incarceration as essential because there's some people who should be incarcerated, to the point of thinking of incarceration as non-essential and starting there. Because if we start there, we're going to get a lot closer to our goal than if we function from a place of it being essential. And a lot of people would say that we're in a very hopeful time. Because even now, there is bipartisan support for reform of prisons, and in a lot of ways based on the cost, but also I think that there are people who do see all of the social ramifications and the social justice issues around incarcerating people, restricting their freedom, and ultimately ignoring some of the reasons of poverty and racism that go into why we are incarcerating 2.3 million people in the United States, 1 million of which are Black. And so when we talk about reducing incarceration, I think what this panel is really going to bring to the forefront are some of the community solutions, what it looks like to not simply be establishment focused in how we address incarceration, but how we center the most impacted voices and the most impacted communities in the dialogue and allow them to be empowered to bring to the forefront the solutions that they believe would most allow their communities not to continue to be impacted by this incredibly unjust process. So we have some amazing panelists. I will first start with introducing Dustin Washington, who is the director of the Community Justice Program with the American Friends Service Committee. Lillian Hugo, who is an attorney with the Incarcerated Parents Project at the Washington Defenders Association. Sharice Dominez, who is an organizer with Silicon Valley Debug. and Nick Allen, who's an attorney with Columbia Legal Services. Do y'all mind clapping as they come to the front of the room? Before I take my seat, to make sure we do everyone the same justice, I'd also like to add that there's going to be 2 additional advocates at the table. Chris Matthews, and Chris is a formerly incarcerated father, community advocate, and veteran parent, meaning he's successfully reunified with his son and being involved in the criminal justice system and child welfare system. And then Shane Rochester, who is another community advocate and formerly incarcerated father, who successfully is also reunified with his child and is being involved after being involved in the child welfare system. So let's give them a round of applause as well. All right, so hopefully we'll get to have a chance to have some question and answer, but we have a ton of material to get through. So if y'all save those till the end, and we'll use the 2 microphones in the middle. So first, I want to invite our panelists to share a little bit about what your motivations and intentions are when you first began doing this work, and maybe what they are now.
Specific order?
I'll allow y'all to jump in as you want to. You can start down there, though, since you talked first, Dustin.
Well, I would say my intentions initially, growing up in the family that I grew up in, experiencing what I grew up in South Jersey. I grew up in a family that was heavily involved with the civil rights movement, heavily involved with the church. And my intentions initially, when I came into this work, what I understood was thinking about social justice. Now I would say my intentions have changed much more to dismantling structural racism and understanding that I used to believe that the systems that exist could be reformed. Now I believe that the systems that exist need to be totally transformed, need to be broken down and then rebuilt. Their foundation is built on a legacy and history of structural, systemic, cultural, internalized racism. And until we dismantle the systems that exist, we're not going to see justice. And I think the understanding that I have today is that we tend to think our systems are broken, but our systems are doing exactly what they're set up to do. And as they are set up currently, we can only see racial disparities and the ugliness that these systems produce.
So having spent as much time as I have in prison, I set out with the major goal of just obtaining my son out of the child welfare system. And in the process, I realized that there's a lot of unheard voices. My whole goal is to just try to change perceptions around that and be an advocate in that sense.
For myself, I got involved just out of survival. I was knee-deep in services and trying not to go back, trying to rebuild a community and network, trying to fit into that. And I just lucked out and found the right people to connect with and saw there was a definite need for that.
So awkward. There's a lot of people here. I haven't been at this law school in a while, but I got started. I also, similar to what Dustin said, I grew up in a community that was over-policed. I'm mixed Latina. I had a community that didn't have a lot of resources, a lot of immigrant folks, and I didn't really understand what was going on at the time. I believed a lot of what I was told. I had a father that struggled with addiction. I thought that maybe prison would fix him. Luckily, my mom was much more aware than I was as a young child and told me, that's not what prison does. And as I grew older and family members were in and out of that system, I never really planned to do work on incarceration issues, and it just kept coming back to me. And I think I came thinking I'm going to do civil rights work, and found reproductive justice. I'm not sure if many folks know what that is, but it's the idea that our communities and individuals are controlled and exploited via our bodies and access to healthcare, and including prenatal healthcare resources, and the idea that the communities that are most oppressed by what they call reproductive oppression, when you are not able to access those resources, are communities of color, immigrant folks, folks that are not able-bodied, and queer folks. And so it sort of is this umbrella that I've been able to work from. And I really don't believe prisons are necessary. I think that healing is possible. And so I think a lot of my work right now, because I've spent so much time being really angry with these systems and being brought to this point of like, how is this possible? How does not everyone see that this needs to change? Having to really come from a place of love before I like fall apart and can't do the work any longer. So a lot of the work that I do now, I like doing the community organizing side of it and working with parents like Shane and Chris and others in the room. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Good afternoon. My name is Sharice Domingo. I came into this. I saw friends, family members who were also incarcerated and racially profiled and entered the criminal justice system. Our organization, Debug, didn't start out as a criminal justice organization. We were a media organization that wrote our own stories and produced our own magazines. But one of the folks in our organization, her father was killed by a state DA agent back in 2004. Unarmed, he was running away from an undercover cop who never identified himself. So our organization got involved in that because our member was impacted and our community was impacted. And from there on, many other communities and families came to us with issues in the criminal justice system. And so our intent moving forward is to bring out and bring forth those families, their stories, not just to tell those stories, but to change the system that was broken to begin with.
No, pretty simple answer. I think the criminal justice system is the worst of our society plays out, and I think that lawyers can play a role in that, and that's where I wanted to focus my legal career.
Excellent, thank you. So a lot of you already started touching on this next question, but can you unpack what some of the historical and systemic roots are of the system and then tie that to what current movements look like now? I'll allow you to jump in where you want to. It's at all of you. I know, that's a big question.
I'll jump in on the parenting side of it. I mean, I think people are a little less maybe knowledgeable around the Adoption I Save Families Act and how that was passed in 1997, right after welfare reform. Again, that word reform in 1996. So we, at the same time as we gutted all, or what existed and what was left of any financial support for low-income families, we gutted, 1 year, and then the next year we passed a law that allowed families that were facing a child welfare system to be kind of fast-tracked through that system. We created arbitrary timelines of 12 months to basically help free up kids in foster care so that they could be adopted to, often loving families that do want to come in and support. But since we have a racialized system and we have low-income folks that are coming into this community, it's mostly kids of color and low-income kids. So those same families that now are doing welfare to work programs, getting cut off for family caps because they have too many kids, they can't get their welfare support, and et cetera, et cetera. So it was just this toppling of like a historical attack on low-income people of color that came from also, years and years of racial degradation, and so it's the piece that I often don't understand, because it's 1997. I don't think is that long ago that we started really looking at our child welfare system, I think, in the way that we did. So I'd like to bring that historical piece in.
Justin, do you mind adding on a little bit from
Sure,
your perspective
sure.
as the organizer?
Sure. So, Nikita, as I think about your question, my first thought went to surely we could go back to the beginning of this country for being here with a bunch of law students. I'm thinking about the Punch decision that happened in 1640. So we're talking about history, right? So I'm thinking about the Punch decision, and John Punch was an African man who ran away with a Dutch and a Scotsman. When they were caught, they were given very different sentences. John Punch wasn't in a permanent state of chattel slavery at that point, but the Dutch and the Scotsman were given 2 years of service to the colony, and John Punch was given a sentence of life. So when we talk about the historical roots of racial disparities in sentencing, we can go all the way back to the John Punch decision. Then I think up to the post-Civil War era after Reconstruction, where we had essentially the adoption of black codes throughout the South, and we had the process that is now known as slavery by another name, where through the Reconstruction of the South, a lot of the industry was rebuilt by arresting black men via these black codes and having black men working, which was essentially another form of slavery to rebuild the South. And the idea was that any black man would be arrested for anything and work to death, and if they die, so what? Because we can go out and arrest somebody else. And then historically, coming up to the post-civil rights era, and I think about the Richard Nixon campaign and his Southern strategy and his law and order platform, and how he really served to help further criminalize the black movement that was happening throughout the country. And then, maybe what's most relative for us today is thinking about the war on drugs, and specifically thinking around juvenile justice and this notion of super predators. And you would see this, covers of Time magazine, Newsweek magazine, and this was conversation throughout the mass media and throughout academia of babies that are being born from crack-addicted mothers who are going to be super predators, black babies, black children, who are going to rape and pillage and destroy America. And we had to develop these harsh laws. So there was a hyper-criminalization of the black body and the black humanity throughout the United States. But when we think about history and the over-incarceration of African-American people that we see today, black people have been criminalized since the beginning of this country, and the crime has been black skin. So for us to understand what we see within our criminal justice system today, if we do not understand history, we're not going to be effective in terms of rooting out the racism that's embedded in all of our systems right now.
Thank you. So with that historical perspective in mind, I'm going to pose this question to you first, Nick. You spend a lot of time in Olympia. With all the what seems like bipartisan support for decreasing incarceration, mostly along the lines of cost and funding, do you feel confident or a sense of optimism around us actually decreasing the prison population?
Well, I'd say that I'm cautiously optimistic, and I think what has been said already about the historical roots of where we're at now plays into all of that. But also, I think one of the reasons that I'm cautiously optimistic is because, and this has already been spoke to a little bit today, a lot of this stuff is doing the right thing for all the wrong reasons. And wrong reasons usually are tied into, well, we're at our limit budget-wise, so we've got to decrease populations. And what happens in those situations, and this is played out over time, is that, well, that's the case for a specific period of time, but when economic times get better, we go back to those old ways. We find out ways to incarcerate more people, to criminalize different populations, and then it kind of ebbs and flows again. We go through the same process. I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind, and again, one of the reasons why I'm cautiously optimistic is we often talk about terms such as movement, such as leadership, in a positive light. But we have to remember that these can also be seen in a negative light as well. Some of the folks that we've considered great leaders have been some of the worst people that have walked this earth. Some of the most successful movements have been negative movements, and one of those movements has been to kind of perpetuate racism and classism in America. And it's much more well-resourced, much more well-funded. They've got their organizers, they've got their lawyers on their side. And so until we can find a way to combat that and organize on this side in a similar way, I'll remain cautiously optimistic.
So along those same lines, before I move on to my next question, does anyone on the panel not think that meaningful change cannot be addressed through policy? All right. What does meaningful change look like on a policy law level? And I want to point this first at Shane, Chris, and Charisse, because I think you all come from a slightly different perspective on law policy. What do you think meaningful change would look like from a legislative perspective?
I think I've had the pleasure of testifying 3 times in the last couple months, and it's been a consensus that by the legislators afterwards that an awareness was brought to them. So my story had been told, but my story is so similar to so many other people. Nobody's speaking for these individuals to the people that make the policies. So I think a one-on-one discussion, or even citizens taking the time out of their day, a few hours out of the week, to go and actually address the people that make the policies. There's a lot of money behind all the policies. There's organizations that set out millions of dollars to get certain laws passed in their favor, but they all seem to go against the smaller persons such as myself or other people that have been incarcerated. One-on-one discussion, awareness.
I would agree that in my experience the last 3 years that I've been involved in policy work and working with representatives and out in the community, that I haven't met anyone who wasn't. I believe that one person can make a difference. Like I never even thought that way before I got out of prison and I got involved in this. But they really have a voice and really can impact the system.
I agree. I think meaningful change really starts with having the people who are most impacted by incarceration, by sentencing laws, by everything that happens between arrest and reentry, be the speakers, the decision makers, the change leaders of our movement. It's Theo Shaw, it's Shane, and it's Curtis. It's the mothers who come and that we see at Debug every Sunday and every Tuesday who are fighting for their sons who are currently facing charges in the criminal justice system. Because it's these folks who could see the holes in the system, who could articulate what that impact of those holes are, and then can come up with solutions around it. For example, like in Santa Clara County, this was 5 years ago, there were no misdemeanor arraignment lawyers at court. So people were just pleading out, like, yeah, guilty, first court date. And so if we told our community, hey, why don't you come and, protest with us, and because we need lawyers at misdemeanor arraignment courts, we're going to get crickets, because they're going to be like, what does that mean? But if we say, well, look, we need you to come because people's rights are being violated on a daily basis because it's their first entry into the criminal justice system, then we're going to get folks to come out. And it's our families who could speak to that and who have those solutions to that. So we actually worked with our public defender at that time to be able to get the funding so that now, at least in Santa Clara County, this is 5 years ago, there's attorneys.
Thank you. So I think there is something to be said for incremental change. We go down to Olympia, we tell our stories, and maybe like some bill gets passed on LFOs, or we get something through that maybe makes an incremental change. What do you think the ingredients are of having an actual social movement, something that's more than just one policy change in the midst of like a major system that actually really needs to either be dismantled or overhauled?
So I'll jump in on this question. But first, I want to say I agree that Shane said that one person can change a lot, and I agree with that. But for the deep level of change that we need to happen in society, we have to build new leadership in a movement. And thinking of the criminal justice system, as we're kind of talking about the criminal justice system now, understanding that the criminal justice system doesn't operate in isolation, that it's connected to housing, connected to government, connected to education, connected to all the other institutions that we deal with. So sometimes we tend to focus on one system but we need to understand that we need to build a movement, a people's movement that's designed to transform all of these systems, because you can't change criminal justice without addressing education, because education, as we all know, around that school to prison pipeline feeds the criminal justice system. You can't change the criminal justice system without changing housing. So we have to have a holistic view first. Number one is sometimes we tend to get issue focused versus movement focused. And one of our core beliefs is that we use the issue to build a movement, for the long term. And I also think that when we think about the prison industrial complex and the criminal justice system, we have to have a sober mind that this is a business and that people are benefiting off of the incarceration of people. People have a desire for this to exist as it exists right now, and people are making a lot of money off of it. And when the chips come down, we will see that we are fighting big moneyed interests, and they will not give up this easily. So it's important for us to have a conscious base in the community and accountable gatekeepers within the institution. But if you don't, one of the things I'm really clear is that folks working within the institution by themselves cannot change the institutions. That hasn't happened. It doesn't happen. The only way change works from our perspective is if you have an accountable, clear, conscious base who has a sense of their power, their own power in community, pushing the institution. Because the institutions, I think about, recently I served as the interim manager for the Race and Social Justice Initiative for the city of Seattle. And one of the things I learned is that politics always gets in the way of any meaningful change. But if you have a base of folks pushing the system from the outside, that's going to lead to more change. So I think our most important task as organizers is to build a base in the community of folks who have clarity, not around just one system, but all the systems, and understand how all those systems are serving to oppress them.
Nick, you've played a major role in building a movement around LFOs. What do you think some of the ingredients are around building a movement?
Well, I think that any movement is kind of, it involves those incremental changes, but it's a link of incremental changes that has a long-term vision in mind, a strategy that's put together, and that doesn't always happen. I think one of the more successful movements that I've seen in the last a couple of years is something that Theo mentioned earlier today, and that is around the transfer and sentencing of juveniles in the adult system. I think there was a idea set out that, okay, we might start off dealing with only 10, 15 youth in the system, and that starts out with, youth who are subject to the death penalty. But seeing long term that, okay, eventually down the line we'll be able to get laws passed that affect all youth. So then it goes to youth who've been convicted of non-homicide offenses and getting rid of juvenile life without parole for them. Moving along the mandatory life without parole sentences for youth who commit homicide offenses, and using those principles to eventually put forth policies that require individualized sentencing for all youth who are coming through the system. I don't think something like that can be done if it's looked at in isolation. I don't think we'd be at the point we are, although it is incrementally, but I don't think we'd be at the point we are today without kind of that long-term vision and without bringing into the picture not only lawyers, not only policymakers, but having the affected community brought in by having organizers brought in. And among those organizers, what's been successful with this campaign is even having, victims recognized as not just one community. What they've been able to do in this campaign is show that victims come from a diverse set of communities and have a diverse set of opinions around these issues to push this kind of stuff forward.
Can I just add to, I think that what I get frustrated with, I think, is like what we are willing as like movements to negotiate away, like what populations we won't touch or work on, depending on whether we use nonprofit structures of mission drift. We don't want to get too far outside of it, so we don't support something or we can't do everything, and trying to really see the intersections of how we work together, and that, a nonprofit and or a lawyer is never going to, change the system. It's going to be the community, and putting more efforts into that piece, and not kind of bringing in the community at the end and being like, I see all those emails all the time, like, can we get someone to come testify? We, if you are actually working with the community that you're trying to serve, you wouldn't have to have that happen, right? And those laws that you're making would better address the underlying root causes and fill some of those gaps so that incremental change can be larger. Because sometimes I think we stop short of what we really could ask for, and we can ask for something larger, and we start with, oh no, we can't take on abortion because we're a criminal justice organization. That's gonna hurt the legislators that we like, or vice versa, right? And I also I feel like there's I don't know how to, sometimes I don't know how to phrase things, but there's just this general disconnect that that lawyers have to be the ones sort of drafting that legislation. And so even when I see folks that are directly affected by issues at the table, they're placed on committees in that group that are like storytelling groups or doing like other pieces. And so I guess I think that one of the ways that we have to do our work is also just recognizing that that the general like experience of the personal experience is just as knowledgeable and can affect that policy. And a lot of folks I know won't even see the legislation that's been drafted until like it's being proposed and dropped at in Olympia.
So along the lines of strategy, as an organizer, something I feel like I've been taught is to center the community most impacted, and within that, to center the people most impacted. I feel like as a lawyer, though, sometimes that goes directly against what I've been taught in seeking these incremental changes, which means sometimes we sacrifice people in the process. So like something we heard this morning was a lot of differentiation between violent and non-violent offenders in the process of trying to decrease mass incarceration. Can you all speak a little bit to when we do that, when we make those concessions, especially as lawyers that maybe aren't impacted by the legislation on behalf of an impacted community, what fundamentally is lost in that process?
Well, Chris and I are working on some work right now. The Family Offender Sentencing Alternative doesn't allow folks that have a violent crime to participate. So the reality is that folks that have violent crimes are parents. They're going to parent. They're going to go back to the community. And so why restrict them from this amazing, or not the most amazing resource, but it's better than what we got, right? And so, and looking at how people really view, because we call people offenders, and we see them as their actions, and not as who they are. And so we've been talking about, and as a lawyer, I'm like, okay, this is going to be really difficult to talk around. Whenever you see a bill, like even right now, there's a juvenile, or is it the mental health court bill that went through? The people that are X'd out of that bill are people with violent crimes. And so it's just like in immigrant folks, they're always X'd out. And so looking at when we let certain groups be the ones that we can like negotiate out, how that hurts everybody, because all folks need the support. We all need it. And I'll let Chris, because Chris is organizing. I went up during Christmas time to see a bunch of formerly incarcerated folks that have been charged with violent crimes, and they're doing work on trying to change this. And the messaging that I could never come up with is their real life experience, and they can tell their story. And I'll let Chris talk about some of the work they're doing with fathers' engagement and stuff. And Shane.
So basically, the 2,871 days I was incarcerated, I had the pleasure of meeting quite a few individuals that are all awesome people. And what I found in common is that all different races, all charged with serious violent crimes, what the state classifies as serious violent crimes. All studies say, and I can't quote exactly where the studies come from because I've been trying to find it. Said that violent offenders are the least likely to recidivate. Yet we are the ones that are used to push all the legislation. Everything, almost all nonviolent and property crimes account for over half of all recidivism and the current prison population. So my goal is, I think in between the 8 guys I had brought, they all had serious violent crimes, from assault, murder, everything. They had all had, I think in between all of us, it's close to almost 100 years in between all of us. Every one of us has been out over the timeline that says that we'll go back within the first year. and all of us are all contributing to the community to help foster kids. My whole point in that is to try to demonstrate to the people that may not know, paradigm shift, that these guys aren't as bad, that you can shake hands with these people, and tattoos on their face or not, they're the funniest, coolest, sweetest dudes, soft, and they're just really good. And I guess that's one of the things I just work at from being in the community that I'm in, is just showing that these people aren't that bad, that regardless of what the media portrays or what you have seen personally, these people are individuals. These are my family members. These are my community members.
And I've done it myself, where I've written a blog that says, majority of people in prison are nonviolent, folks. And so I now have tried to shift that language of saying, there's a lot of people that are serving for drug crimes, and and just wording it differently and not othering.
Sometimes when I think about that, is it okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes when I think about that notion of focusing on non-violent versus violent offenders, it almost feels like that kind of parallel of house slave versus field slave, and we start to worry about who's most palatable to dominant culture. And from my understanding, my political understanding is that, and I'm speaking, every poor person, every person of color that's in prison, from our perspective, is a political prisoner, because whatever act that they were charged with or might have done happened within a racist political context. And I think when we start to parse out nonviolent and violent offenders, and I don't even like the language of offenders and all that stuff, because I prefer political prisoners, but when we start to parse that out, typically it's around making an argument that's palatable to the powers that be. And when I think about our training, all of us, whether it's law school or any higher education, we sometimes get so trained to be so in the box in terms of our thinking, and we try to be so strategic that we lose the original power of our argument. And what we are seeking is freedom, and we should not compromise around freedom. Now, are we going to work for incremental goals in the short term? Yes, but our big picture vision, our overall vision, should be total and absolute freedom, and we lose the strength of our argument by watering everything down with language that makes people more comfortable instead of for language that seeks truth.
So how do you select incremental goals that don't detract from the big picture goal, that don't get to the point where you've compromised so much that you've actually allowed the system to kind of build itself up now around this compromise to the point that you can't get to what you set out to do in the first place? How do you distinguish between those? Any ideas? Well, I'll give one personally. I think one really important one that Lillian already brought up is bringing the community in from jump as opposed to on the back end. Mm-hmm. Because when we do that, we allow the community to then direct what decisions we make around who and what is cut, as opposed to us as organizers or lawyers making those decisions for them, which is how the system's been set up. It's usually someone who's not involved in the actual situation making the decision of what's going to be implemented. Which brings me to my next question, which I think is a major struggle, is when we're talking about a racialized system that's built not only on oppression, but also on privileging particular groups of people, and you're trying to make what you're wanting to achieve palatable for folks who may lose money or power in the process of making things more equitable. What are ways that you get people to invest in that change or to want to see that change as important to them as well, despite maybe the loss of money or power in the process?
Okay, I don't want to hog the mic, so please forgive me. Well, I'll share an example, and this kind of speaks to your last question as well, because I really want to double down on bringing community in. I think community has to drive everything that we do. But I think about, we're involved in the No New Jail campaign around the building of a new youth detention center. And the county went out and talked to the Squire Park Neighborhood Council around getting their permission and their approval and endorsement around building this new jail. And they went out and talked to them about how this is going to raise their property values, because that's a heavily gentrified community right now. And they sold them on this. However, when we start to go back, and this is 99% white neighborhood council, but some of our white allies in European descent, which is a white anti-racist group, went out and went door to door and went to the neighborhood council meeting and started to engage with this community. And they called for a follow-up council meeting, and they had the largest turnout they've ever had. And to a person, they voted unanimously once they heard the truth around this situation, they'll pull back their support. So I think if we can get out and talk with community and really engage with community, especially in a language, plain talk or plain understanding, in a way that people can understand, when people hear the truth, the majority of people want to do the right thing.
I think just to speak too on the incremental, like it depends on who's defining what's incremental and what's not. Like I remember we were part of a coalition in neighboring San Mateo County where, the topic of juvenile ICE holds came about. So the probation department, we're routinely referring youth to ICE within hours of a young person being detained. And some folks in the coalition, it was a broad coalition, like faith-based and criminal justice advocates, immigration advocates, public defenders were part of the coalition. And folks were okay with saying, well, if you were charged with a violent crime or serious felony, then, sorry, we can't do anything about that. And for us and our families and other groups too, who had that direct experience of their young 14-year-old, being shipped off to a detention facility, and having that trauma happen to not just their son, but also to the family. So for us, no juvenile ICE holds period was our incremental first step. While other folks, were like, well, just the nonviolent. So that goes into, I think what folks have been saying is that folks who are most affected need to be the ones strategizing, needs to be the one telling their stories and proposing solutions.
And can I just add, like when we were working in 2013, Shane was a part of advocating for this as well, and Mary Helen Roberts is in the room, was a sponsor of the bill. We passed SHB 1284, which is the Children of Incarcerated Parents bill, and that bill it supports incarcerated parents, formerly incarcerated parents, and allows them to have possibly more protections throughout the dependency process. During the process, they can get more time if they can show they're maintaining a meaningful role. And then at the end of the process, they might not get their rights terminated as easily. And so part of that was drafted with actual women in prison, the Incarcerated Mothers Advocacy Project, and a lot of the work and the stories they heard from women that about visitation, about all those access resources in the dependency world are all issues that affect all families in the community in the child welfare system. But if we start with trying to push bills for incarcerated people and the rights that they have in that child welfare system, I feel like those rights can trickle up. But if we just started with parents in the community, those parents in the prison would still be pushed down. So one way I think about it is starting with the most and least resourced community that we're looking at, and starting from that place and envisioning what those folks that are actually affected want to see. The other thing that I think is an important piece, and I keep losing my train of thought, I'm getting nervous today, is, and it was something that you had brought up. Nick had brought up. Anti-oppression is a huge part of this, and so as long as something's convenient and it's easy for the legislators to push it, and it looks good for them right now, either immigration's a hot topic or decarceration, all those things, but we need to, I think, when we go and speak in front of the legislature or when we're in those tiny rooms, be using that language as anti-oppression language of why we're doing this. It's not just a quick solution. And recently, Chris, I meant to cue it up so we could show what he did. These two shut down a bill that it was HB 1800 that they were going to make it easier to terminate parental rights for folks. They went down there and just told how it was and took over the mic literally, and the legislature was getting all squirmy because they weren't supposed to be talking about some of the things. And Chris, one of the I won't say her name, but she was like, well, Chris is like, do you know this bill, the FAR assessment bill? And what the legislature said, yeah, we helped pass that, tapping themselves. And he's like, that's 90 days. And he's like, what you're trying to do. And so 90 days, this FAR assessment bill allows families to get back on their feet and get out of the child welfare system. So if you think families can do that on the front end, and so on the back end you want to take 90 days away from them, like, what are you doing? And so you say you're trying to help, but then you're doing this. And so he basically just like told them, you know, exactly how it was. And I'd like to show you all that video, but embarrass his amazing work. But that's the kind of thing I think that getting at that, like, anti-oppression, whether, I know we can't get every legislator to like take Leticia Nieto's workshop or do those things now, but we can start using that language and asking for those asks now.
Absolutely. Since we're talking about tangible examples, does anyone else have a tangible example? I mean, we use these words anti-oppression and long-term relationships and community a lot, but I think sometimes we don't actually know what they mean, which is why we get caught up in these strategies of sending out the email and asking for, does anyone have someone who can come speak? Because we don't know how to make it tangible in our work. Do you all have more examples in your work of either making, using anti-oppression philosophies and ideologies in your work, or what it looks like to create long-term relationships and community? How about we start with Sharice or Chris and Shane?
For me, it was my struggle through the system and talking to people in the system and trying to find the right group. Like, I was required to go to NA meetings, and that was the worst place to put me. And so when I found and connected with people in child welfare, as I was trying to get my son back, it was getting involved in the community, that got me re-involved in the community, and then I felt like I had like a voice again. And so those were.
What about your leadership?
So I'm a part of a lot of organizations. I'm a family case manager for the YWCA, Evergreen Manor. I'm a family case manager, and we work. We work in Snohomish County. We have a parent group that helps other parents that's been running for 5 years. That every parent who's come to this group has gotten their child returned home. Every parent has been successful in doing that. Facilitated fatherhood engagement group, working with men, connecting with men who otherwise are there's not any services for men in the community. So connect with them and engage them and find resources and help them navigate. You know, Justin was saying that there's all these agencies are all, there's all these different systems, but none of the systems talk to each other. So, like, you don't know about education, you don't know about how to find a job. You don't, like, there's flyers. I saw a couple flyers when I was incarcerated about going back to school. But the reality was I had some skills that I thought I could fall back on, but when I hit the community, I was like, I didn't have a network anymore. I didn't even think about that. And then I never done an email. Like, I never had to do an email. Like, people knew who I was. I was a builder. Like, that's what I could do. But then I couldn't do that. And it was a struggle. There was no way to navigate system like that. These systems didn't talk. So what I was able to do was through my fighting and connecting with other parents who like grabbed me and said, I've been through what you're going through. That was huge. That mentorship piece was what did it. And that mentorship was then when I had my son return home, and then in Montana for the first time in my life, and I was able to go to a life skills class, and then I was able to go to a career. A pre-college class, and I was able to go to school, and then with that and the TANF and everything, get into school, and you got to kind of build yourself up after you've been incarcerated and you've destroyed everything and destroyed your network. A lady asked earlier, asked a question, like when the lady that was speaking at the podium there, that no one asked the question, what happened? I mean, we all fit into this world somewhere. We all have a purpose. We didn't come here to be incarcerated or to be, disappoint everybody or, that's not why what happened to bring you to this point. And, we all have a different story. It's all a different reason why we ended up coming, and getting involved in the system, but I don't remember anyone ever asking me, like, what happened? Why is this happening?
I think part of what I hear you saying is talking about empowerment. I think systems in a lot of ways are inherently oppressive if you don't know the language or know how to send the email or all these things that we take as being professional and making you worth listening to. And something I feel like something I've experienced in organizing is organizers who want to do everything for the community as opposed to redistribute and impart that knowledge so they can do it for themselves. And I personally think that's a real paradigm shift from moving from a system that is oppressive because of the way it controls information to redistributing that information. Anyone else have anything to add about making anti-oppression and building relationships and community tangible?
Yeah, I can that. I think one of the things that we did in our work around legal financial obligations had that connection to the community. It was really brought to us from the community as an issue initially, not really even tied into the impact on the poor. It was initially kind of tangentially related as an issue that affected voting rights. Once that was addressed, the community continued to say, look, this is still an outstanding issue that we need to address, and while lawyers, policymakers can work on that legislative level, what can we do in the meantime with our own specific legal financial obligation issues? And so that's really where a lot of the genesis for our legal clinic came from, and also making the clinic such that it's a self-advocacy clinic. And I think that's in part because there's not enough resources to go around to serve everybody who has that need, but also because I don't think that philosophically we want people to totally rely on legal services as to solve their problems. That we want to be able to say, going to your point about empowerment, taking the information, having lawyers not hold tight to that information, but take the knowledge, the skills we have, impart that upon the community so that the community can take and run with it and come up with solutions to problems moving forward.
Can I add also one of the focuses of the Incarcerated Mothers Advocacy Project, and when we do our Know Your Rights presentations, it's to impart rights information, but it's also to bring people into the room in the prison that have similar issues. And so women and individuals that are in our classes are able to connect and learn from each other and realize that a lot of the times we lawyers or law students we sometimes have social worker type volunteers come in, like those aren't the folks that have all the answers. A lot of the times people realize they have a lot of the answers themselves and can teach each other and know a lot. And then within that start seeing the connections with like, wait, that happened on my case, that's happening in your case, and see the systemic problems and start to see that this is like an institutional problem and how do we start thinking about change. And so and in doing that work with IMAP and my position, we collaborated to do a leadership policy training at the women's prison with a formerly incarcerated mother out of New York. And our hope was that, we do this sort of structured leadership training and talk about leadership and what that looks like, and in the context of like reentry and, what are safe spaces and what are safe spaces here in the prison, what were those before and what will they look like in the future, and kind of connecting leadership to real life. And then out of that, a few of the women that took part in that training are now trying to organize in the prison to create a video visiting program for their sisters that are in prison and individuals in prison that don't have the money to pay $13 to have a video visit. And so it's those things where we had no idea what would come out of that, and it's sort of just having people in a room together, prisons themselves at least, and they work to keep people apart. Like, these folks can't have a meeting on their own unless it's part of like a prison planned program. And so part of even doing our services, if we were to go in there and just meet with people individually, we would be doing a disservice, because it's an opportunity for people to get together and see how this system's impacting them as a group, as a whole, and not just as an individual.
Dustin, do you have things to add?
Yeah.
Does it start a riot? Is that what you said? I mean that's the thing. If folks got together and did that without an organization there, it is considered rioting. And I'm sure there's an infraction number, and and so yeah, and thinking about that,
Yeah.
So when I think about principles kind of that drive our work and the notion of relationships, I think about it on multiple levels. I think about a lot of us who work together. I mean, we're doing this work 24/7. I'm just looking out at Ardell, and the work that we're able to do together and the trust we built doesn't just happen through the work, but it happens through authentic relationship. I think about Ardell being in my house in the NFC championship game with the Seahawks, and being able to spend that time together, which is a beautiful, beautiful night. But being able to go out together, eat together, build and know each other's stories, that's a very important part of this work. Because a lot of this work sometimes can be stressful. I mean, we're asked to do a lot of things, but I think the relationship is what sustains us through the work. And when I think on an organizational level, one of our core principles is the notion of accountability. And a lot of times, organizations will have focus groups and, that kind of stuff with their constituency. But one of the best ways it was explained to me in terms of organizational accountability is, can your constituency come and see your budget? And they see your program plan. Not only see it, but can they drive it? Can they say, you're spending money over here in our name, you wrote these grants, got funded in our name, but this is not the work we want you to do, or this is not the program work we want you to do. That's an authentic level of accountability, we believe. And then just the other piece in terms of principles is really understanding the principle of internalized oppression and understanding the spiritual and psychological and emotional damage that living in an extremely oppressive society has done to our people. One of the things I've heard a lot of people like Ardell and other people talk about the need to have revolutionary love for our people and revolutionary patience for our people and understand what has been done to our people. And a lot of times we can see certain things playing out in our community, and without an analysis around that, we tend to blame the people. And so I guess the very last thing I would say is, our core belief is that people are not poor or oppressed in this society because they lack any of the programs. So any of the stuff I give, my organization, or any other program and service, people are fundamentally poor because they lack power to control their own destiny. Mm-hmm. And we don't believe programs and services is what brings liberation. In many ways, it helps keep the paradigm in place. So if we could start to focus less on broken individuals, because a lot of times folks who have felt the brunt of oppression, we tend to blame ourselves and say something's wrong with us, and we just need to go to this class and get this fixed. But there's nothing wrong with us. We need to start changing broken systems that create the environment. So those are some of our core principles.
And one key way that I know a lot of you are addressing broken systems, internalized oppression, is the use of language. So even just bringing up that word riot, what is a riot really? In a prison, it's a few people getting together. That's a particular way they're using a word. I know in Sharice's work, one thing you all have done is really just gotten rid of the word client. Can you talk a little bit about what it looks like to start transitioning out of the use of that word and what that does to the work?
Yeah, we never use the word client to begin with. Our organization, we're made up of families and who have loved ones who are currently facing charges in the criminal justice system. None of us are lawyers at our Sunday meetings, our Tuesday meetings. And for us, the way we approach trying to change the court systems as well as the individual court cases that families come with is from an organizing ethic. And so, and it's that same ethic that got communities to put a stop sign on their neighborhood, or the same ethic that got workers to get higher wages or better working conditions. So for us, it's not, the work that we do is not service, because at the end of the day, what we want to do is empower and activate the very person who's facing those charges, and the family and the community that loves them and supports them, and not just in creating policies, but also just working on that person's case. So it means tangible things like, going through police reports, or meeting with the attorney, or packing the courtroom, or creating a social biography mitigation packet or video packet to tell the story of that person who's facing charges, and have and be okay that the media that we make is for a media of one, because we're only trying to change one person's mind in a case. So we never use the word class.
Can you explain a little bit about your social biographies? Because when I learned about that the other day, I thought that was really amazing work that y'all are doing.
Cool. Yeah.
Do you want to show the video?
It's another video that I made. We can show a 2-minute thing later. But thanks for
I'm kidding.
the segue. But so social bio videos. So again, the other half of debug is media, is community media, and so we started out doing these things where so we'd have these Sunday meetings, and we had a father come and say, look, I'm facing a 5-year prison time for a drug charge, and I basically I don't have a problem doing the time, but what I can't stand is the idea of my 3 daughters being given up to the foster care system. And so after he got arrested, he started going to AA classes, and started going back to church and all that. And so at that point, the public defender wasn't returning his calls and stuff. And so we worked with him on his case. But then we said, well, let's start to create a social biography mitigation packet. Let's show the courts who loves you, who's supporting you, and stuff. And so he got letters from his teachers, from the school's teachers, from his AA sponsor, from his pastors, and then we gave him a camera and say, okay, so just document your day, like from the moment that you wake your kids up, feed them breakfast, take them to school, pick them up, take them to volleyball practice, and all that. Just show your day. And so we went and he did that, and there's a thick packet of all these photos of their grades, their transcripts, and how they were getting straight A's and doing really well. And the DA still wanted the 5-year top. We went to sentencing with that packet, and the judge granted him a 6-month outpatient program so he could be with his kids, and so he could continue with his job. And that was 4 years ago, and his oldest daughter is now applying to college. With our work, we also have an amazing core of videographers and photographers. So we said the 2.0 version of these mitigation packets are videos. And so we started creating these videos, not just at sentencing, because that's usually when folks use it in the criminal justice system, but also in plea negotiations, in dropping charges, and stuff. And they're 9-minute long videos that talk about the impact of any potential incarceration, and who else would be affected if someone went to jail. So someone went to prison.
You know what I find most inspiring about these videos is we start out talking about a language shift, but I think the work that you're doing is more of a paradigm shift. One of the things I really struggle with in the law is the lack of ability for people to advocate for themselves. When you go to court, it's a lawyer who speaks on behalf of the client, or excuse me, you don't use client, speaks on behalf of the person who's being charged and being brought into court, and they never get to speak for themselves. And I've always found that to be really problematic, because I think people tell their own stories better than I as an attorney ever could. They're going to be way more moving. They're way more connected to it. And so I think in the nonprofit world, something we really struggle with when interacting with systems is continuing to buy into the way that the system is set up. As organizers and attorneys and people doing this work, do you all have other examples of ways that you've created a paradigm shift, whether it be in the legislature or in the courtroom, by doing something that seemed entirely out of the box and maybe not even appropriate in the courtroom or the legislature, to really start changing the paradigm of the way that we do this work?
I can say that this whole veteran parent movement, parents who have a veteran parent is a parent who has successfully navigated the child welfare system and is active in giving back. These parents come get referred to us, and we'll call their social workers, their A-gals, their CASAs, and we'll get everyone at the table, and we'll support them in these meetings in courtrooms. We'll fill courtrooms. We support them through these groups. Because what we really do is once they connect with us, then we'll BCC'd on their emails. So it's holding the social workers accountable. It's bringing everyone to the table. It's letting them know what their rights are. So if you think that the regular criminal system is confusing, try going to dependency court, where there's 10 people at the table sometimes. Every person has an attorney, the child has an attorney, and then you have so it's really intimidating. And then on top of it, it's the the guilt and the shame to go along with losing your kids. So.
And when we were passing the bill, those parents all did shamrocks and like during like what's that holiday that everyone drinks on? St. Patty's Day and shamrocks, and then on Valentine's Day hearts, and like delivered those to the legislators. And then we also had a packet of poems that a group of individuals at the women's prison had done a separation and loss poetry class that was meant to basically just fill the gap of how most of the time when we come in for legal stuff, there's no answer or solution to the problem, and it's really heartbreaking. And so the poetry class was a way to like work through those emotions, and we brought a facilitator in that taught that class, and then out of that came some amazing poems that then we passed out to the legislature too. So,
but it's really like having the people that, like the mentors, the people that have been through it, that can actually connect with the individuals, whether it's through incarceration or whether it's through the child dependency system, that holds the other systems accountable because you've been through it and you're successful, so you know what to ask for, you know what, and you can connect with the parent. And then when the social workers and the attorneys know that, like Chris and I have a case with a father that's found me somehow, and he's in a Montana holding facility, and Chris has someone that's in Walla Walla, and their attorney's not doing their job, and so it's like we reach out and we're like, it's.
And who's that attorney? He's Chris's attorney.
I don't care.
But I'm saying he's Chris's attorney, so he's now had 3 incarcerated parents where he's treated them all very poorly. And Chris just...
It's not my attorney no more as of today.
Chris
The
got
case was
his
closed
kids.
today.
That's awesome.
Not here to talk about me. Let's save the world.
Well, I could ask a million more questions, but we only have about 7 minutes left. So I wanted to open it up for y'all who have been listening. Has anything been sparked? Do you have any questions you want to ask?
Well, it's for Dustin. You spoke about the broken systems, but also you gave the history of these systems. And so would it be fair to say that the systems aren't broken, that they're designed to do what they were doing from their inception, was to keep people oppressed? And if that's the case, how do we address a system that's designed to do what they want to do from the beginning? Education, housing, all these systems you spoke of, they've been treating people of color the same since the 1500s.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on it. And I contradicted myself in my language because earlier I said these systems are doing exactly what they're supposed to do, and I use that kind of analogy of broken people, broken systems, which you're exactly right. And so kind of my thinking as of now is that I'm on this kind of 75-25 idea. 75% of our energy should be focused on building our own stuff in community and taking care of our own needs, and really using the kind of survival programs of the Black Panther Party almost as a model, and 25% of pushing these systems. But we can spend 100% of our time pushing these systems, and they're not moving in the way, nor do they know how to move, nor do they have the inclination to move in the way they need to. So I think during this time period, for our time as organizers in 2015, we should be focusing on building our own stuff in community, building our own leadership in community, so we can build a big enough base, kind of, using that analogy in boxing, getting our weight up a little bit so we can really have power when it's time to push these institutions. Because as it stands right now, we do have the power, but we have not organized effectively enough to marshal that power to change these systems. So I think everything you said, I agree with.
So being in a room full of lawyers who are not always connected to the communities that they're advocating for, how do you suggest they be a part of that dismantling building structure?
Well, I think if lawyers can get involved with community efforts, so thinking of what, Ardell is a part of Career Bridge, myself, Nikita, you and I, and other people in this room are part of EPIC and YUR. I think attorneys bringing their skill set and what they know to a community space and melting into that community effort can be helpful. This Saturday, we're doing something called a tribunal on the juvenile justice system at Seattle University. And even with your question earlier around how do we do paradigm shifts, one of the things that we're done is, typically when you think of a tribunal, most people design a tribunal on a dominant kind of framework that exists. But we really flip that on top of its head, and we're centering the people and really trying to create a cultural and humanistic space for the people that are coming in, not centering this around the people in power, but really about the people who who've experienced the brunt of this system. So I think, Nikita, the short answer is for folks to really get involved in some community-based efforts. That I think, attorneys bring a certain skill set, certain understanding, certain way of thinking that I think can support community, and vice versa. Community has some clarity and some understanding and skill set that can support the attorneys. So I think as much as we do stuff within the institution, getting involved with community-based efforts.
Nick and Lillian, would you have anything to add to that as attorneys who have worked in community-based efforts?
Yeah, I think that there's first of all, under like a community lawyering concept, there is the idea that there's the community and that there's the lawyer, and that they don't cross over, and they're not one and the same in some respects. And I certainly feel that I don't feel that I'm isolated from the community by being a lawyer. I feel that this is part of my community and part of the change that I want to see. So I see it as just a normal collaboration between somebody who's doing one thing and somebody who's doing something else in the community, and coming together to work towards that common goal.
Yeah, for me, I don't know how to do the work any differently, and I've actually gotten sort of in trouble at different organizations that I've worked for because they're like, why are you not in the office more? Or what are you doing? And I'm running around, and do you have to be at that meeting? And shouldn't somebody else be doing that? So I've struggled with it myself, of trying to live by my values while I do my work. And one of the things that I think that in law school I missed, but lots of classes because I was attending veteran parent meetings. I worked with the veteran parent folks for a good 2 or 3 years before I ever did anything, right? It's like I think lawyers think they show up and they're going to do something. And I was part of the group. I worked on other advocacy efforts. And then when the time came where folks wanted to work on changing legislation around incarcerated parents, it was the perfect fit because that's also what I had been working on, and we had discussed the idea of it. So I think that it takes time, and a lot of the find ways to use your internships or use your externship experiences to shape and put that community piece in if the internship doesn't allow that, and just make that a piece of the job of getting out of the classroom or getting out of the law office, because there's no way you can build rapport and trust with people if you just show up when you need something. And yeah. And the thing is like, it's nuts what law school does teach you. I think that I sometimes, I meet with a lot of friends, and I really I believe that art changes hearts and minds, and I'm talking to a lot of my friends that are artists and trying to think about how we can affect policy change via the community, via art. And I realize that that I have received a training and I have a skill set, and so it's not to play down what you have as a lawyer, especially because it's such a privilege, and it's something that that we should value, but find ways to use that without taking up too much space in the room. And that's going to be a balance probably that each lawyer has to figure out the best way to do that.
So Charisse, not to put you on the spot as kind of our last person who will speak, can you speak, I think something that we, especially if we're lawyers of color or we're lawyers who come from backgrounds that relate to the folks with whom we're working, it's a little bit easier for us to get into the community. Can you speak about maybe white lawyers or more lawyers who come from those privileged backgrounds, how they've worked well with you all as you do your work? What does that look like?
I think for us, what it's looked like, it's when white lawyers are able to call out the racial injustices that happen in the courtroom, or are able to speak from their, acknowledge their privilege and stuff, and speak openly on that, and then also fight and do for us, we mostly deal with public defenders and stuff, and so and be able to not just kind of plea mill folks through the system, but actually fight back and call out some of the racial injustices that happen within the system. And so and I think like as you know, I think Nick said it when he said that, you know, lawyers and communities don't have to be separate entities, but they have to be in conversation with each other if we are trying to build a real authentic movement that's about anti-oppression and about our people's freedom. And so, you know, so not to be afraid to get into those conversations and stuff, and when we all can agree to what's at stake.
Thank you. So if we could give a round of applause for all our panelists. I hope that if you have any additional questions that maybe during the break, you'll find one of them, introduce yourself, and ask them. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikita, and thank you, panel, and thank you, Martina Cartman, who's a law student who was kind of the engineer behind this as well, and so I'm really appreciative of that. This was really a powerful way to end the day with some just really concrete thoughts about how we can all work together. And one of the things I was thinking about a little earlier in the day when I said I was really glad this this gathering was happening here at the law school, and then I thought later I didn't really explain what I meant by that, but then Nikita asked the panel a question that actually just went ahead and explained it, and it's because this is what I feel. First of all, this isn't a room full of lawyers. There are a lot of lawyers in this room. There's a lot of community activists in this room and social service providers and students and so on. To me, why that's so important, that people come together and don't feel that divide between, you know, that old phrase, town and gown, whatever, is that, in fact, if we're going to make anything happen, we need all of our disciplines and all of our expertise, whether that's law as an expertise in a discipline, whether that's the social work or the medical field or the activist or the organizer, all of those are required to be in communication and in collaboration together. So I was really honored that we could be hosting this here and bringing those voices together, and I hope it's really been useful for you. One of the things that I want to do is take a moment before we leave, because there is a reception and there's food and drink, so, and we can keep talking and also, you know, eat. So, which is also, I think, very important. I want to just take a moment to, again, thank some really specific people. So the Legal Foundation of Washington, which gratefully took on the opportunity to work with that Judd versus State of Washington funds and bring people together and provide support. And specifically, Caitlin Davis Carlson, Andrea Axel, and Sarah Broomfield, who really did so much to convene our committee and bring them together. So let's just clap for them first, and then I'll do some more. So that committee that put this together was also comprised of a bunch of other really fantastic people, like Murph Eamon, who you've heard from Columbia Legal Services, Melissa Lee, who I was looking at, oh, there she is, from Columbia Legal Services, Ann Lee from Team Child, who has been here most of the day. I don't know if she's still here. Arnold Alexander from Interaction Transition. He's been taking pictures today, too. Oh, where is he? All right, well, I guess he walked out of the room. And so those were some, and also I was on the committee. So that was, yes, thank you for all of us. But then I also really want to especially call out that there were some law students who joined that committee, and that really, I thought if we're going to be at the law school, I want to have law students involved. I want them to come. And so I want to acknowledge Jessica Knowles, Lauren Connor, Nikita Oliver, who you've met, Martina Cartman, and really just thank them for being an active part of putting this together and doing the work. So let's clap for them. And then finally here in the building, we have just got so much logistical support from Ann Spangler and from Lenny Hom on food and arrangements and rooms and technology. So please join me in thanking them. So now just a few more thank yous, bear with me. So everybody who was here today as a speaker, as a panelist, the facilitators, there were 2 facilitators in every room, really gave a lot of heart and soul and thought and care into helping to make this day be a really great day. So please join me in thanking them. And then, okay, now finally, of all of that, really the biggest thank you in my mind and heart goes out to all of you who were here, especially those of you who stayed all the way to the end of the day. But really to all of you who participate, because all of you, for whatever reason, are engaged in this work. For some of you, it might be personal. You might have a family member who was incarcerated. For some of you, or maybe it was yourself, or maybe it was just something that touched your heart as a human being in seeing a way in which we really take a piece of our society and treat them as though they are not human beings. And for whatever reason, that grabbed you and got you involved. And not only do you then do the work that you do in the day and the night and the weekend, you also came here to spend the day with us and to meet some of your colleagues and make new connections and new relationships that will help to make the work richer and hopefully more successful and abundant. So really, biggest thank you of all to you for all that you do and that you're going to keep doing. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So this work may seem like it's taking forever and that sometimes you have one step forward and two steps back. But, I think two things. One, if I can hearken back to Theo Shaw this morning as he eloquently quoted W.E.B. Du Bois, that, to be those agitators who make something happen, that's what'll make a difference. And then if I can quote Martin Luther King and just remind us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it does bend toward justice. And we're going to see justice for people, and we'll just keep at it. So on that note, please come down to room 115, have some food and drink, talk with people. Don't be in a hurry to leave. Thank you again for being here.